Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a monumental stack of global sources, tear them apart, and give you the absolute essentials.
Today, we're plunging into the 2026 World Economic Situation and Prospects Report. We just call it the WESP report.
Right, and it's a crucial annual forecast. It's compiled by UNDESA, UNCTAD, and the 5 regional commissions. It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. And for you, our listener, our mission is simple. We want to distill all these complex findings into a clear, reliable economic outlook for the year ahead.
And this report is particularly fascinating because it presents this central paradox.
It does. We're seeing deep global resilience happening right alongside, profound fragility.
Resilience and fragility. I mean, that sums up the last few years perfectly, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So if we had to put a title on the global economic outlook for 2026, the report gives us this wonderfully bland but meaningful phrase: stable but subdued growth.
Exactly. And subdued is the key word to focus on here. They're forecasting global growth at 2.7% for 2026.
Now, that number sounds okay on its own.
It sounds fine until you realize what we used to consider normal.
Which was 3.2%.
Yeah.
That was the pre-pandemic average between, 2010 and 2019.
Right. So we're not just recovering slowly. We are structurally running half a percentage point slower than the decade before the shock.
That's a huge implication.
It suggests the world is just grappling with these persistent structural headwinds. Everything from aging demographics to debt and, perhaps most importantly, geopolitical fragmentation.
Okay, let's unpack that fragmentation. I think we have to start with the trade picture. The report focuses heavily on the major trade disruption of 2025.
The sharp unilateral increase in United States tariffs.
This was a gigantic policy move. And the sheer magnitude, it's startling. The average effective U.S. tariff rate climbed from a pretty manageable 2.5% in 2024.
To an estimated 15% by November 2025.
15%, that's a 5-fold increase.
In under a year. Logically, you would expect an immediate catastrophic seizure in international commerce.
But that didn't happen.
No. And what's fascinating here is the resilience. The global economy actually absorbed this tariff shock better than most models predicted, at least in the short term.
So why didn't we see an immediate meltdown? Were the new tariffs just slow to bite, or did businesses find ways around them?
It was less about avoiding them and more about anticipating them. The resilience was primarily supported by these short-term buffers.
Buffers.
They essentially pulled forward demand from 2026 into 2025. We saw massive front-loaded shipments, particularly out of East Asia.
So exporters just rushed goods to the U.S. ahead of the tariff hikes.
Exactly. It created immediate revenue and a huge inventory accumulation on the U.S. side.
So it was like shoppers hoarding goods before a known price rise, but on a massive multinational scale.
A perfect analogy. We essentially borrowed some growth from the future to smooth out the present shock.
And was there a policy side to that?
Yes. Crucially, policy actions helped stabilize the situation. The report highlights some targeted tariff reductions, and maybe most vital for market confidence, a 1-year trade truce announced between the U.S. and China.
Right, in November 2025.
And that limited temporary de-escalation prevented the kind of broader, catastrophic trade war that would have truly tanked global sentiment.
But temporary buffers are, by definition, temporary. Now that the front-loading effects are fading, what happens to global trade in 2026?
Well, now we feel the cost. Global trade growth is projected to soften significantly. It's slowing pretty sharply to 2.2% in 2026.
And that's down from what, about 3.8% in 2025?
Exactly. Those higher 15% tariffs are now entrenched, and global supply chains are still trying to adjust to this new fragmented environment. It's creating persistent friction.
That fragmented environment really sets the stage for what I see as the defining theme of the year, this two-speed global economy. The outlook for the major players is, broadly stable, but for the world's most vulnerable countries, it's a very different story.
The divergence is absolutely stark. If you look at the major developing economies, some are charting a powerful, independent course. Take India, for example.
Right.
India is expected to see really robust growth, forecast at 6.6% in 2026.
And that strength is mostly domestic.
Almost entirely. It's driven by resilient domestic consumption and very strong public infrastructure investment. That's allowing it to largely offset any negative impact from the U.S. tariffs.
India is a domestic demand powerhouse. What about China, though, given its reliance on manufacturing and exports?
China's growth is projected to moderate a bit, down to 4.6% in 2026, which is still respectable.
And how are they managing that?
It's sustained by targeted policy support internally, but externally, they've shown a remarkable ability to pivot their exports to other markets, specifically ASEAN countries and Europe.
And back home, the United States.
The U.S. is projected to edge up slightly to 2.0% growth in 2026, and that's mainly supported by fiscal and monetary policies.
So the core takeaway here is that these major economies, the US, China, India, they have enough internal fiscal or consumer muscle to absorb these big external shocks.
Without collapsing, yes. But then you have to look at the other side of the track.
The least developed countries, or LDCs, this group comprises the world's poorest and most vulnerable nations.
And they are struggling significantly to gain any kind of traction. While their collective growth is forecast to strengthen to 4.6% in 2026.
Which is an improvement?
It's an improvement, but that number is still well below the Sustainable Development Goal target.
And what is that target specifically?
The SDG goal mandates a minimum of 7% annual growth for LDCs.
7%?
7%, just to achieve crucial development milestones. So at 4.6%, they are failing to keep pace with their own long-term needs. This is a chronic crisis.
And they're constrained on multiple fronts, aren't they? It's security, it's debt, it's everything at once.
Precisely. They're wrestling with security concerns, extremely limited fiscal space, elevated debt burdens, and for the apparel exporting LDCs, those high U.S. tariffs are just crushing their export prospects.
And the financial safety net they rely on, Official Development Assistance, or ODA, that's shrinking at the very moment they need it most.
It's a massive concern. ODA is projected to decline further in 2026 and 2027. And the report warns that if these cuts go through, ODA flows could fall all the way back to 2020 levels by 2027.
Wow, that's a rollback of 7 years of progress in assistance. When you see a decline like that, where is the pain felt most acutely?
The steepest proportional declines are projected for the very regions already struggling, LDCs and sub-Saharan Africa.
So it just widens that critical financing gap.
It reinforces the two-speed economy perfectly. The strong can buffer their shocks, the weak are seeing their support disappear.
That economic divergence is one thing, but that disparity is about to get baked in by technology. And this is where it gets really interesting, moving from trade and debt to artificial intelligence. Right. The report identifies AI as a key driver of capital formation, but notes this immense concentration risk.
AI is the definition of uneven growth right now. I mean, it promises these medium-term productivity gains.
And what are the projections on that?
They range from about a 0.7% to a 1.5% increase in productivity globally by 2035. But the investment is extraordinarily clustered.
How clustered are we talking?
The investment data is staggering. The United States alone accounted for roughly 72.5% of global corporate AI spending in 2024.
72.5% in the U.S. alone?
Yes. That concentration risk means that the initial wave of productivity gains will be felt almost exclusively in a handful of high-income regions.
So the promise of AI for economic acceleration is real, but it's currently localized. And that localized growth seems to be creating a strange side effect: inflation.
That's the hidden cost. The immense computational needs for, training and running these large AI models require massive electricity consumption by data centers.
And demand is outstripping supply.
It's expected to significantly outpace capacity growth, creating an inflationary pressure that filters through the entire economy.
And the WESP report gives us hard numbers on that, right? Specifically on electricity price increases.
It does. They project that just due to AI data centers, average electricity prices between 2025 and 2030 could rise by an estimated 8.6% in the United States.
8.6%.
And 5.6% in China and 3.6% in Europe. But that 8.6% in the U.S. is a very significant inflationary headwind that gets passed directly to consumers and industries.
So AI helps a few companies become hyperproductive, but it makes the lights more expensive for everyone else. What about the labor market? Is AI displacing workers right now?
That displacement risk is absolutely measurable, particularly for those just starting out. The data shows that young workers, specifically those aged 22 to 25 in AI-exposed sectors, saw a measurable 6% employment decline.
A 6% decline for early career workers.
Between late 2022 and July 2025, yes. It underscores that the first wave of automation tends to target routine entry-level roles.
The exact roles young professionals need to build experience.
Exactly. And while new, high-value jobs are being created, the displacement in routine roles is happening faster and more unevenly than initially hoped.
Shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the consumer experience, which is maybe the most confusing part of this 2026 outlook. Headline inflation is easing globally, projected at 3.1% for 2026. Yet the cost of living crisis persists. So what does this all mean for you, the person actually paying bills?
It's a crucial distinction. The headline number reflects the rate of price increase slowing down. The price level itself is not declining.
So prices aren't getting cheaper, they're just rising less quickly.
Right. Global inflation came down sharply from its peak of 7.9% in 2022 to 3.4% in 2025. But crucially, that 3.4% is still above the pre-pandemic average of 2.8%.
It's like climbing a huge mountain and only slowing your ascent near the summit. You're still exhausted at the top.
That's a perfect analogy. The cumulative pressures from those sharp surges for essentials, food, energy, housing, have profoundly eroded real incomes. Families have lost purchasing power.
And that pressure just sticks around even if the news says inflation is falling. And I assume, like everything else in this report, that burden is highly unequal.
Absolutely. The cost of living pressures disproportionately burden low-income households, rural communities, and women who often spend a larger share of their income on those essentials.
So how are central banks responding? Are they rushing to cut rates to stimulate things?
They are proceeding with extreme caution. Monetary easing continued through 2025. Roughly two-thirds of central banks were in an easing cycle, but policy rates still remain well above pre-pandemic levels.
So any further cuts in 2026 will be gradual.
Very gradual, due to those lingering inflation risks, especially when you factor in the rising cost of energy from the AI data centers we just talked about.
That measured approach brings us to the final solution-oriented section: the need for reinvigorated international cooperation. This leads us to the pivotal outcome for mid-2025, the Sevilla Commitment.
The Sevilla Commitment is intended to be a new international agenda. It's a dual goal: mobilize investment at scale and critically reform the international financial architecture.
It's the global community's attempt to actively counter that fragmentation we started with.
Exactly.
So what does that commitment look like on the ground? What are the practical mechanisms?
One of the most important is the commitment to improve debt crisis prevention through the systematic use of what are called state contingent debt instruments.
That is a mouthful. For the listener, what does that technical term actually mean?
Essentially, it's financial weather insurance for nations. It means the terms of debt service are automatically suspended or paused during massive external shocks.
Like a natural disaster or a pandemic.
Exactly. A pandemic, a collapse in commodity prices, it builds immediate financial resilience for vulnerable nations when they need it most. It prevents a shock from immediately turning into a national debt crisis.
So it shifts the immediate risk away from the vulnerable nation. That sounds promising, but these kinds of instruments have been talked about for years. Why should we believe this will finally make them happen at scale?
That's a fair challenge. But the commitment includes specific structural mandates. For example, it mandates the establishment of a borrower's platform supported by a UN entity
To give them a unified voice.
to promote dialogue, transparency, and capacity building. And finally, it includes concrete actions aimed at encouraging multilateral development banks, the MDBs, to triple their lending capacity,
The goal being just to get massive amounts of stable capital moving where it's needed most.
bypassing the volatility of private markets, yes.
So bringing it all together, we're looking at a 2026 defined by stable but subdued growth, fragmented trade, and a sharp economic divergence made worse by concentrated AI. For the everyday household, the cost of living crisis persists, even as policymakers celebrate easing inflation.
That's the perfect synthesis. The world economy has proven resilient, but it's still profoundly fragile, and the benefits of growth are not being shared equitably.
And there's one more layer to this.
Right. As we close, it's vital to remember the context that underpins all of this economic activity: the environment. We can't forget the climate feedback loop.
Absolutely not.
The robust economic performance we saw in 2025, which helped absorb that tariff shock, was unfortunately accompanied by record carbon emissions globally.
Which underscores the persistence of these deeply carbon-intensive growth patterns.
And climate-related extreme events are no longer isolated shocks. They are structural forces now, disrupting agriculture, driving up food prices, and demanding huge fiscal outlays for disaster response.
So those environmental shocks feed right back into the economic and inflationary instability we're trying to fix.
Precisely. So despite promising new commitments like the Sevilla Commitment and ambitious climate goals like the COP30 Belém package, here's the final provocative thought for you to mull over. The core challenge for the coming year is reconciling the immediate political and economic need for resilient, stable growth with the long-term existential imperative of rapidly decarbonizing the global economy. Those two paths are currently moving in opposite directions, and that tension will define the decades to come.